Still part of Chapter 5 in the Lost Keys of Freemasonry, Transmutation. Masonry is eternal truth, personified, idealized, and yet made simple. Eternal truth alone can serve it. Virtue is its priest, patience its warden, and illumination its master. The world cannot know this, however, save when Masons in their daily life prove it that it is so. Its truth is divine and is not to be desecrated or defamed by the thoughtlessness of its keepers. Its temple is a holy place to be entered in reverence. Material thoughts and material dissensions must be left without its gates. They may not enter. Only the pure of heart, regenerated and transmuted, may pass the sanctity of its field. The schemer has no place in its ranks, nor the materialist in its shrine, for Masons walk on hallowed ground, sanctified by the veneration of ages. Let the tongue be stilled, let the heart be stilled, let the mind be stilled. In reverence and in the silence, stillness shall speak. The voice of stillness is the voice of the Creator. Show your light and your power to men, but before God, what have you to offer, save in humility? Your robes, your tinsel, and your jewels mean naught to him until your own body and soul, gleaming with the radiance of perfection, become the living ornaments of your lodge. The presence of the Master. The Mason believes in the great architect, the living keystone of creation's plan, the Master of all lodges, without whose spirit there is no work. Let him never forget that the Master is near. Day and night let him feed the presence of the Supreme or overshadowing One. The all-seeing eye is upon him. Day and night this great orb measures his depths, seeing into his innermost soul of souls, judging his life, reading his thoughts, measuring its aspirations, and rewarding its sincerity. To this all-seeing One he is accountable. To none other must he account. This spirit passes with him out of the lodge and measures the Mason in the world. This spirit is with him when he buys and sells. It is with him in his home. By the light of day and by the darkness of night it judges him. It hears each thoughtless word. It is the silent witness to every transaction of life, the silent partner of every man. By the jury of his acts, each man is judged. Let every Mason know that his obligations include not only those within the narrow lodge, bordered by the walls of stone and brick, but those in the great lodge, walled only by the dome of heaven. The valley of Jehoshaphat waits for him who is false to any creature, as surely as it's waited for the breakers of the cosmic oath. Chapter 6. The qualifications of a true Mason. Every true Mason has come into realization that there is but one lodge, that is, the universe, and but one brotherhood, composed of everything that moves or exists in any of the planes of nature. He realizes that the Temple of Solomon is really the Temple of the Solar Man, Sol, On, the King of the universe manifesting through its three primordial builders. He realizes that his vow of brotherhood and fraternity is universal, and that mineral, plant, animal, and man are all included in the true Masonic craft. His duty as an elder brother to all the kingdoms of nature beneath him is well understood by the true craftsman who would rather die than fail in this, his great obligation. He has dedicated his life upon the altar of his God and is willing and glad to serve the lesser through the powers he has gained from the greater. The mystic mason, in building the eyes that see behind the apparent ritual, recognizes the oneness of life manifesting through the diversity of form. The true disciple of ancient masonry has given up forever the worship of personalities. With his greater insight, he realizes that all forms and their position in material affairs are of no importance to him compared to the life which is evolving within. To who allow appearances or otherworldly expressions to deter them from their self-appointed tasks of failures in masonry, for masonry is an abstract science of spiritual unfoldment. Material prosperity is not the measure of soul growth. The true Mason realizes that behind these diverse forms there is only one connected life principle, the spark of God in all living things. It is this life which he considers when measuring the worth of a brother. It is to this life that he appeals for a reason, a recognition of spiritual unity. He realizes that it is the discovery of this spark of unity which makes him a conscious member of the Cosmic Lodge. Most of all, he must learn to understand that this divine spark shines out as brightly from the body of a foe as it does from the dearest friend. The true Mason has learned to be divinely impersonal in thought, action, and desire. The true Mason is not creed bound. He realizes with the divine illumination of his lodge that as Mason, his religion must be universal. Christ, Buddha, or Mohammed, the name means little, for he recognizes only the light and not the bearer. He worships at every shrine, bows before every altar, whether in temple, mosque, or cathedral, realizing with his truer understanding of the oneness of all spiritual truth. All true Masons know that they only are heathen who, having great ideals, do not live up to them. They know that all religions are but one story told in diverse ways for peoples whose ideals differ, but whose great purpose is in harmony with Masonic ideals. North, east, south, and west stretch the diversities of human thought, and while the ideals of man apparently differ, when all is said and the crystallization of form with its false concepts is swept away, one basic truth remains. All existing things are temple builders, laboring for a single end. No true Mason can be narrow, for his lodge is the divinest expression of all broadness. There is no place for little minds in a great work. The true Mason must develop the powers of observation. He must seek eternally in all the manifestations of nature for the things which he has lost, because he failed to work for them. He must become a student of human nature and see in those around him the unfolding and varying expressions of one connected spiritual intelligence. The great spiritual ritual of his lodge is enacted before him in every action of his fellow man. The entire Masonic initiation is an open secret, for anyone can see it played out on the city street corners as well as in the untracked wilderness. The Mason has sworn that every day he will extract from life its message for him and build it into the temple of his God. He seeks to learn the things which will make him of greater service in the divine plan, a better instrument in the hands of the great architect who is laboring eternally to unfold life through the medium of living things. The Mason realizes, moreover, that its vows, taken up his own free will and accord, give him the divine opportunity of being a living tool in the hands of a master workman. The true master mason enters his lodge with one thought uppermost in his mind: how can I, as an individual, be of greater use in the universal plan? What can I do to be worthy to comprehend the mysteries which are unfolded here? How can I build the eyes to see the things that are concealed from those who lack spiritual understanding? The true Mason is supremely unselfish in every expression and application of the powers that have been entrusted to him. No true brother seeks anything for himself, but unselfishly labors for the good of all. No person who assumes a spiritual obligation for what he can get out of it's worthy of applying for the position even of water carrier. The true light can come only to those who, asking nothing, gladly give all to it. The true brother of the craft, while constantly striving to improve himself mentally, physically, and spiritually through the days of his lives, never makes his own desires the goal for his works. He has a duty, and that duty is to fit into the plans of another. He must be ready at any hour of the day or night to drop his own ideals and at the call of the builder. The work must be done, and he has dedicated his life to the service of those who know the bonds of neither time nor space. He must be ready at any moment's notice, and his life should be turned into preparing himself for that call which may come when he least expects it. The Master Mason knows that those most useful to the plan are those who have gained the most from practical experiences of life. It is not what goes on within the tiled lodge which is the basics of his greatness, but rather the way in which he meets the problems of daily life. The true Masonic student is known by his brotherly actions and common sense. Every Mason knows that a broken vow brings with it a terrible penalty. Let him also realize that failure to live mentally, spiritually, and morally up to one's highest ideals constitutes the greatest of all broken oaths. When a Mason swears that he will devote his life to the building of his father's house and then defiles his living temple through the perversion of mental power, emotional force, and active energy, he is breaking a vow which imposes not hours but ages of misery. If he is worthy to be a Mason, he must be great enough to restrain the lower side of his own nature, which is daily murdering his Grand Master. He must realize that a misdirected life is a broken vow, and the daily service, purification, and the constructive application of energy is a living invocation which builds within and draws to him the power of the Creator. His life is the only prayer acceptable in the eyes of the Most High. An impure life is a broken trust. A destructive action is a living curse. A narrow mind is a strangle cord around the throat of God. All true Masons know that their work is not secret, but they realize that it must remain unknown to all who do not live the true Masonic life. Yet, if the so-called secrets of Freemasonry were shouted from the housetops, the fraternity would be absolutely safe. For certain spiritual qualities are necessary before the real Masonic secrets can be understood by the brethren themselves. Hence, it is that the alleged exposures of Freemasonry printed by the thousands and tens of thousands since 1730 down to the present hour, cannot injure the fraternity. They reveal merely the outward forms and ceremonies of Freemasonry. Only those who have been weighed and in the balance and found to be true, upright and square, have been prepared themselves by their own growth to appreciate the inner meanings of their craft. To the rest of their brethren, within or without the lodge, these sacred rituals must remain, as Shakespeare might have said, words, words, words. Within the Mason's own being is concealed the power which, blazing forth from its purified being, constitutes the builder's word. His life is a sole password, which admits to him the true Masonic lodge. His spiritual urge is a sprig of acacia. Through the darkness of ignorance still proves that the spiritual fire is alight. Within himself he must build those qualities which he will make possible in his true understanding of the craft. He can show the world only forms which mean nothing. The life within is forever concealed until the eye of spirit reveals it. The Master Mason realizes charity to be one of the greatest traits which the elder brothers have unfolded, which means not only properly regulated charity of the purse, but charity in thought and action. He realizes that all the workmen are not on the same step, but wherever each may be, he is doing the best he can do, according to his light. Each is laboring with the tools that he has, and he, as a Master Mason, does not spend his time criticizing, but in helping them to improve their tools. Instead of blaming poor tools, let us always blame ourselves for having them. The Master Mason does not find fault, he does not criticize, nor does he complain, but with malice towards none and charity towards all, he seeks to be worthy of his Father's trust. In silence he labors, with compassion he suffers, and if the builders strike him as he seeks to work with them, his last word will be a prayer for them. The greater the Mason, the more advanced in his craft, the more fatherly he grows, the walls of his lodge broadening out to all living things that are sheltered and guarded with the blue folds of his cape. From laboring with the few, he seeks to assist all, realizing with his broader understanding the weakness of others, but the strength of the right. A Mason is not proud of his position. He is not puffed up by his honor, but with a sinking heart is eternally ashamed of his own place, realizing that it is far below the standard of his craft. The farther he goes, the more he realizes that he is standing on a slippery basis, and if he allows himself for one moment to lose its simplicity and humility, a fall is inevitable. A true Mason never feels himself worthy of his craft. A student may stand up on the top of the fool's mountain, self-satisfied in his position, but the true brother is always noted for its simplicity. A Mason can not be ordained or elected by ballot. He is involved through the ages of self-purification and spiritual transmutation. There are thousands of Masons who are brethren in name only, for their failure to exemplify the ideals of their craft makes them unresponsive to the teachings and the purpose of Freemasonry. The Masonic life forms the first key of the temple, and without his key none of the doors can be opened. When this fact is better realized and lived, Freemasonry will awake and speak the words so long withheld. The speculative craft will then become operative, and the ancient wisdom so long concealed will rise from the ruins of its temple as the greatest spiritual truth yet revealed to man. The true Master Mason recognizes the value of seeking for truth wherever he can find it. It makes no difference if it be in the enemy's camp, if it be truth, he will go there gladly to secure it. The Masonic Lodge is universal, therefore all true Masons will seek through the extremities of creation for their light. The true brother of the craft knows and applies one great paradox. We must search for the high things in lowly places, and find the lowly things in high places. The Mason who feels holier than his fellow man has raised a barrier around himself through which no light can pass. For the one who in truth is the greatest is the servant of all. Many brethren make a mistake in building a wall around their secrets, for they succeed only in shutting out their own light. Their divine opportunity is at hand. The time has come when the world needs the ancient wisdom as never before. Let the Mason stand forth, and by living the doctrines which he preaches, show to his brother man the glory of his work. He holds the keys to truth. Let him unlock the door, and with his life, and not his words, preach the doctrine which he has so long professed. In the fatherhood of God and the brotherhood of man were united the completion of the eternal temple, the great work for which all things came into being, and through which all shall glorify their Creator. Masons, awake! Your creed and your craft demand the best that is in you. They demand the sanctifying of your life, the regeneration of your body, the purification of your soul, and the ordination of your spirit. Yours is the glorious opportunity. Yours is the divine responsibility. Accept your task and follow in the footsteps of the master masons of the past, who with the flaming spirit of the craft have illuminated the world. You have a great privilege, the privilege of illumined labor. You may know the ends to which you work, while others must struggle in darkness. Your labors are not to be confined to the tiled lodge alone, for a mason must radiate the qualities of his craft. Its light must shine in his home and in his business, glorifying his association with his fellow men, in the lodge and out of the lodge. The mason must represent the highest fruitage of sincere endeavor. Epilogue: The Priest of Ra. What words are there in modern language to describe the temple of Amun-Ra? It now stands amidst the sands of Egypt, a pile of broken ruins, but in the heyday of its glory it rose a forest of plumed pillars, holding up roofs of solid sandstone, carved by hands long laid to rest into friezes of lotus blossoms and papyrus, and colored lifelike by pigments, and the secrets of which were lost with the civilization that discovered them. A checkerboard floor of black and white blocks stretched out until it was lost among the wilderness of pillars. From the massive walls, the impassive faces of gods unnamed looked down upon the silent files of priests who kept all right alight with altar fires, whose feeble glow alone lighted the massive chambers throughout the darkness of an Egyptian night. It was a weird, impressive scene, and the flickering lights sent strange, ghostly forms scurrying among the piles of granite, which rose like mighty altars from the darkness below to be lost in the shadows above. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the shadows, carrying in his hand a small oil lamp which pierced the darkness like some distant star, bringing into strange relief the figure of him who bore it. He appeared to be old, for his long beard and braided hair were quite grey, but his large black eyes shone with a fire seldom seen even in youth. He was robed from head to foot in blue and gold, and around his forehead was coiled the snake of precious metal, set with jeweled eyes that gave out flashes of light. Never had the light of Ra's chamber shone on a grander head, or a form more powerful than that of the high priest of the temple. He was the mouthpiece of the gods, and the sacred wisdom of ancient Egypt was impressed in fiery letters upon his soul. As he crossed the great room, in one hand the scepter of the priestcraft, in the other the tiny lamp, he was more like the spirit visitor from beyond the environs of a death than a physical being, for his jeweled sandals made no sound, and the sheen from his robes formed a halo of light around his stately form. Down through the silent passageways lined with their massive pillars, past the phantom figure, down steps lined with kneeling sphinxes, and through avenues of crouching lions the priest picked his way until at last he reached a vaulted chamber whose marble floor bore strange designs traced in some language long forgotten. Each angle of the many-sided and dimly lighted room was filled by a seated figure, carved in stone, so massive that its head and shoulders were lost in shadows no eye could pierce. In the center of this mystic chamber stood a great chest of some black stone carved with serpents and strange winged dragons. The lid was only a slab, weighing hundreds of pounds, without handle of any kind, and the chest apparently had no means of being opened without the aid of some Herculean power. The high priest leaned over, and from the lamp he carried lighted the fire upon an altar that stood near, sending the shadows of that weird chamber scurrying into the most distant corners. As the flame rose, it was reflected from the great stone faces above, which seemed to stare at the black coffer in the center of the room with their strange, sightless eyes. Raising his serpent-wound staff and facing the chest of somber marble, the priest called out in a voice that echoed and re-echoed from every nook and cranny of the ancient temple, "Aradamas, come forth!" Then a strange thing happened. The heavy slab that formed the cover of the great coffer slowly raised, as though lifted by unseen hands, and there emerged from its dark recesses a slim white-clad figure with his forearms crossed on his breast, the figure of a man perhaps 30 years old, his long black hair hanging down upon his white-robed shoulders in a strange contrast to the seamless garment that he wore. His face, devoid of emotion, was as handsome and serene as the great face of Amun-Ra himself that gazed down upon the scene. Silently, Aladamas stepped from the ancient tomb and advanced slowly toward the high priest. When about 10 paces from the earthly representative of the gods, he paused, unfolded his arms, and extended them across his chest in salutation. In one hand, he carried a cross with a ring as the upper arm, and this he proffered to the priest. Aladamas stood in silence as the high priest, raising his scepter to one of the great stone figures, addressed an invocation to the sun god of the universe. This finished, he then addressed the youthful figure as follows: "Aladamas, you seek to know the mystery of creation. You ask that the divine illumination of the thrice greatest and wisdom that for ages has been the one gift the gods would shower upon mankind be entrusted to you. Little do you understand of the thing you ask, but those who know have said that he who proves worthy may receive the truth. Therefore, stand you here today to prove your divine birthright to the teaching that you ask. The priest pronounced these words slowly and solemnly, and then pointed with his scepter to a great dim archway surmounted by a winged globe of gleaming gold. Before thee, up those steps and through those passageways, lies the path that leads to the eye of judgment and the feet of Amun-Ra. Go, and if thy heart be pure as the garment that thou wearest, and if thy motive be unselfish, thy feet shall not stumble, and thy being shall be filled with light. But remember that Typhon and his hosts of death lurk in every shadow, and that death is the result of failure. Aladamas turned and again folded his arms over his breasts in the sign of the cross. As he walked slowly through the somber arch, the shadows of the great unknown closed over him, who had dedicated his life to the search for the eternal. The priest watched him until he was lost to sight among the massive pillars beyond the shant span that divided the living from the dead. Then, slowly falling on his knees before the gigantic statue of Ra, and raising his eyes to the sun god, he prayed that the youth might pass from the darkness of the temple pillars to the light he sought. It seemed that for a second a glow played around the face of the enormous statue, and a strange hush of peace filled the ancient temple. The high priest sensed this, for rising, he relighted his lamp and walked slowly away. His beacon of light shone fainter and fainter in the distance, and finally was lost to view among the papyrus blooms of the temple pillars. All that remained were the dying flames on the altar, which sent strange flickering glows over the great stone coffer and the 12 judges of the Egyptian dead. In the meantime, Aladamas, his hands still crossed on his breast, walked slowly onward and upward until the last ray from the burning altar fire was lost to view among the shadows far behind. Through the years of purification he had prepared himself for the great ordeal, and with a purified body and a balanced mind, he wended his way in and out among the pillars that loomed about him. As he walked along, there seemed to radiate from his being a faint golden glow which illuminated the pillars as he passed them. He seemed a ghostly form amid a grove of ancient trees. Suddenly, the pillars widened out to form another vaulted room, dimly lit by a reddish haze. As Aladamas proceeded, there appeared around him swirling wisps of this scarlet light, First they appeared as swiftly moving clouds, but slowly they took form, and strange misty figures in flowing draperies hovered in the air and held out long swaying arms to stay his progress. Wraiths of ruddy mist hovered about him and whispered soft words into his ears, while weird music like the voice of a storm and the cries of night birds resounded through the lofty halls. Still, Aladamas walked on, calm and masterful, his fine spiritual face outlined by his raven locks in strange contrast to the sinuous forms that gathered around and tried to lure him from his purpose. Unmindful of strangers, of the strange forms that beckoned from ghostly archways, and the pleading of soft voices, he passed steadily on his way, with but one thought in his mind: Fiat lux, let there be light. The ghastly music grew louder and louder, terminating at last in a mighty roar. The very walls shook, the dancing forms swayed like flickering candle shadows, and still pledging and beckoning vanished among the pillars of the temple. As the temple walls tottered, Aladamas paused. Then, with slow, measured step, he resumed his search for some ray of light, finding always darkness deeper than before. Suddenly before him loomed another doorway, flanked on either side by an obelisk of carved marble, one black and the other white. Through the doorway glowed a dim light, concealed by a gossamer veil of blue silk. As Aradama slowly climbed the flight of steps leading to the doorway, there materialized upon the ground at his feet a swirl of lurid mist. In the faint glow that it cast, it twisted like some oily gas, filling the entire chamber with some loathsome miasma. Then out of this cloud issued a gigantic form, half human, half reptile. In its bloodshot eyes burned ruddy pots of demon fire, while great claw-like hands reached out to enfold and crush the slender figure that confronted it. Aladamas wavered for a single instant as the horrible apparition lunged forward, its size doubly magnified by the iridescent fog. Then the white-robed neophyte again slowly advanced, his arms still crossed on his breast. He raised his fine face, illumined by a divine light, and courageously faced the hideous spectre. As he confronted the menacing form, for an instant it loomed over him like a towering demon. Suddenly Aladamas raised the cross he carried and held it up before the monster. As he did so, the crux ansata gleamed with a wondrous golden light, which, striking the oily, scaly monster, seemed to dissolve its very particle into golden sparks. As the last of the demon guardians vanished before the rays of the cross, a bolt of lightning flashed through the ancient hallways and, striking the veil that hung between the obelisks, rent it down the center and disclosed the vaulted chamber with a circular dome, dimly lighted by invisible lamps. Bearing his now flaming cross, Aladamas entered the room and instinctively gazed upward to the lofty dome. There, floating in space, far above his head, he saw a great closed eye, surrounded by fleecy clouds and rainbow colors. Long Aladamas gazed upon the wonderful sight, for he knew that it was the eye of Horus, the all-seeing eye of the gods. As he stood there, he prayed that the will of the gods might be made known unto him, and that in some way he might be found worthy. to open that closed eye in the temple of the living God. As he stood there, gazing upwards, the eyelid flickered. As the great orb slowly opened, the chamber was filled with a dazzling, blinding light that seemed to consume the very stones with fire. Aladama staggered. It seemed as if every atom of his being was scorched by the effulgence of that glow. He instinctively closed his eyes, and now he feared to open them, for in that terrific blaze of splendor it seemed that only blindness would follow his action. Little by little, a strange feeling of peace and calm descended upon him, and at length he dared to open his eye to find that the glare was gone. The entire chamber was bathed in a soft, wondrous glow from the mighty eye in the ceiling. The white robe he had worn had also given place to one of living fire, which blazed as though with the reflection of thousands of lesser eyes from the divine orb above. As his eyes became accustomed to the glow, he saw that he was no longer alone. He was surrounded by 12 white-robed figures, who, bowing before him, held up a strange insignia, wrought from living gold. As Aladamas looked, all the figures pointed, and as he followed the direction of their hands, he saw a staircase of living light that led far up to the dome and past the eye in the ceiling. With one voice, the 12 said, "Yonder lies the way of liberation." Without a moment's hesitation, Aladamas mounted the staircase, and with feet that seemed to barely touch the steps, climbed upward into the dawn of a great unknown. At last, after climbing many steps, he reached the doorway that opened as he neared it. The breath of morning air fanned his cheek, and a golden ray of sunshine played among the waves of his dark hair. He stood on the top of a mighty pyramid. Before him, a blazing altar. In the distance, far over the horizon, the rolling sands of the Egyptian desert reflected the rays of the morning sun, while, like a globe of golden fire, rose again of the eternal east. As Aladamas stood there, a voice that seemed to issue from the very heavens chanted a strange song, and a hand, reaching out as it were the globe of day itself, placed a serpent rod of gold upon the brow of the new initiate. "Behold, Capra, the rising sun, for as he brings the mighty globe of day out of the darkness of night between his claws, so for thee the Son of Spirit has risen from the darkness of night, and in the name of the living God we hail thee, priest of Ra. So mote it be."